Imagine opening your eyes to realize that every sensation had been heightened. Every small detail, from the pores on your skin down to the very fibers of the carpet beneath you, had begun to breathe in unison. If statistics are accurate, about 15% of you have experienced this before, and the same 15% are ineligible for psychedelic assisted psychotherapy. This is a new form of treatment that's being studied for treatment-resistant forms of depression, anxiety, and multiple forms of addiction. But there's 2 requirements to be able to participate. One of which is that you must be psychedelic naive, meaning you can have never had a hallucinogenic drug in your past. The second being that you must be labeled as treatment-resistant. What does this mean? Nowadays, a lot of forms of depression and anxiety and addiction are unaffected by modern forms of treatment. In fact, a lot of clinical studies nowadays show that psychodynamic treatments for generalized anxiety disorder tend to have little to no long-lasting effects. And the same is true for unipolar depression. In fact, a lot of clinicians tend to prescribe drug therapies on top of cognitive behavioral therapies, and even still, almost a quarter of their patients remain treatment resistant. As far as addiction goes, some cases are met with great success, but the majority of the time they're only moderately beneficial in comparison to people who receive no treatment whatsoever. And in fact, some of these treatments tend to be more socioculturally based, like self-help programs. So they tend to require these huge lifestyle modifications that most clients aren't capable of, which is what happened in the case of Corinne McLaughlin, a retired social worker from Baltimore. She'd been a smoker for 40 years and had tried to quit over 20 times before her doctor just finally labeled her as treatment resistant. She said smoking was her best friend, that it was always there and it was reliable for her, but she had tried to quit smoking and she just was a smoker, and that was just how the world was. Until one day, she read an article about how scientists were studying treating nicotine addiction with psychedelic assisted psychotherapy. At first, she had some adverse thoughts about this because it is such a life and brain altering therapy. Because whenever you consume the psilocybin, it basically starts to alter the way in which your brain communicates with itself in order to rewire the way that you think. See, in one study with 38 participants, they found a decoupling of the prefrontal and posterior cingulate cortices, which basically means that the part of your brain that normally identifies the self stops communicating. Dr. Matthew Johnson from Johns Hopkins University described this effect in treatment as the ability to step back and take a look at your life without being so caught up on the momentary temptations. Another thing that the psilocybin does once consumed is it becomes a monoamine oxidase inhibitor, which is basically what the first set of antidepressant medications was. And the funny thing is they actually work on almost the exact same serotonin neurotransmitters. It's the 5-HT2 and 1A serotonin neurotransmitters. And throughout your life, your brain goes through these phases of neural pruning where it, gets rid of all the old information that you don't really use anymore so it can build new neural pathways that more efficiently benefit you. And so Dr. Johnson kind of describes this as if you live in a big city and you stop talking with your neighbors, but you start talking with the guy that lives on the opposite side of town as you. It's kind of going to lead to newer and novel ways of thinking, not only about yourself, but about the town and the world in which you live, which is what happened to Corinne. So she decided to sign up for the psychedelic assisted psychotherapy. And one morning at 9 a.m., she was given a 30 milligram heroic dose. And she said that she was nervous because she didn't really know what to expect, but she started to see these big gray fluffy clouds sinking in from the ceiling and smothering her. She didn't talk for the majority of her treatment. In fact, she cried for a lot of it, and she never once brought up cigarettes to the clinicians. She just frequently kept saying that she was trying to process her feelings in order to let go of the things that she needed to let go of. And whenever she woke up, she said that she was processed out, but that she wasn't scared anymore. And that's the thing about people with addiction and depression and anxiety, kind of similar to Corinne, is that they have these peculiar and suboptimal ways of thinking not only about themselves, but about the world. The same way Corinne said, I'm just a smoker and that's the way the world is. Maybe that's exactly why the rewiring effects of the psychedelic assisted psychotherapy produces such long-lasting effects. In fact, it's proven to be one of the longest lasting efficacies of any biological treatment after one singular dose. They also discovered that the extent of ego dissolution and brain connections during the treatment produced longer lasting positive psychosocial changes in functioning for patients way past the 4-month mark that they were studying. And they also found a 25 to 100% decrease in the Yale-Brown Obsessive Compulsive Scale scores for patients with OCD. And they found a correlation between the long-term efficacy of the treatment and scores of oceanic boundlessness and dread of ego dissolution, which basically means the more mystic or terrifying your experience, the longer lasting the effects. Which is exactly what happened to Corinne and her terrifying experience. Her and her husband went out to dinner immediately afterwards, and when he asked her for a cigarette, she realized she could not take a puff. To this day, she says you could pay her $1 million and she could not do it. And now that's the thing about the world of psychology, is scientists are making new discoveries every day, but there's so much that we don't know. One thing we do know is that there's not always just one cause to every problem. It's not genes or environment, but it's an amalgamation. In fact, twins who share 100% of DNA only share mental disorder 45% of the time. And just like there's no one cause of a problem, there's no one solution. Psychedelic assisted psychotherapy may be the first beneficial treatment somebody receives. And that's why scientists, just like Matthew Johnson, are trying to make this treatment available for all patients in need.